Hi there, I'm Chris Sarandon, and I'd like to welcome the people who are listening to our podcast tonight, and to the folks who are watching us, streaming, and to this rowdy live audience out here. We're here at the Sacred Heart University Community Theatre in downtown Fairfield, Connecticut, so we're welcoming you all. And now I'd like to introduce my guest for the evening. Ken Page is an extraordinary actor, singer, and director. He's appeared on Broadway in The Wiz, in Guys and Dolls, where he won a Theatre World Award, in Ain't Misbehavin' on Broadway, where he won a Drama Desk Award, and of course, he was Old Deuteronomy in Cats. His concert, Page by Page, plays dates all over the country, and 2 nights ago, he played a sold-out house at Feinstein's 54 Below in New York City in his new cabaret show, Ken Page. There's so much to talk about and sing about, too. You also may know him as the voice of King Gator in All Dogs Go to Heaven, and of course, my favorite, the entertainingly evil Oogie Boogie in Tim Burton's The Nightmare Before Christmas. So, ladies and gentlemen, the one and only Ken Page.
Hello. Hiya.
Hey, buddy. Have a seat.
Yes.
So, we're going to be talking a little bit about food, my friend, which I know it makes you happy.
Yes, sir.
Tell me a little bit about growing up in St. Louis.
In general, well,
Yeah.
you know, I was born in 1954. So the time that I was, you know, up until 8, 9 years old, it was very interesting. And I'm realizing it more now than I ever did before, is that it was, you know, a lot of things weren't right and things were going on and so forth, but it was a very innocent time still.
Right.
Things were simple and people were, I think, enjoying the simplicity to a degree, you know.
Yeah, and it was pretty much the same in small towns, too. I mean, I grew up in a small town, but it was...
Well, St. Louis is a small, big city, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's not like a roaring town like Chicago or New York. And the area that I grew up in was very community. And they talk about a village and all the things like that.
Right.
And it really was like that. I mean, you know, my mother and my aunts and uncles had grown up there in their teen years, and my grandmother had come there. Anyway, so there were all these elders, if I would call them, you know, in the community. So when I came along, not only did I have cousins, meaning my grandmother's generation cousins, I had cousins, and then anyone who was your elder, and I mean, you had to kind of reach a level to be the elder. You didn't just proclaim yourself somebody's elder, you know.
Right.
And all of these people really took care of everybody. You know, we always laugh and say, well, if you couldn't get away with anything, because somebody was always watching.
Everybody knew everybody's business.
And you do something, and there was this lady, Miss Trula was her name. She was older, and she just sat on her porch and watched everybody. So, you know, you do something, and then you go, oh, God, I forgot she's watching me. And you turn around, and she just go.
The head shakes.
Yeah, she's going to tell it. I'll get in trouble. You know.
Yeah.
But that was the blessing of it as well.
Yeah.
You know, you never felt unprotected or... and, you know, we weren't rich by any means, so it could have been a different experience, but the love that was surrounding us all made it wonderful.
Tell me a little bit about the family. Your mom, your dad, your stepdad.
My stepdad? My stepdad and my mother married later. My dad and she didn't really stay together very long. Yeah. But my mother, again, she dated Ike Turner, if that gives you any indication of the kind of... Yeah, it was that time. Ike and Tina Turner were still performing around St. Louis in the late 50s. They were still there. Yeah. This is pre-Tina, by the by, right? And my mother, I gotta say, and I'm not saying this out of because she's my mother, you know, but if you look at Beyonce, my mother was like that. Oh. She was really beautiful and you know, all of the things that you know. Right. So she was living as they say now, she was living her best life, right? And
but she was a working mom, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. But she was also 19 when I was born. Oh, wow. So, you know, by the time I was 8 or 9, she was only, 20-something? You know, I mean, she was still very, very young. Right. Yeah. And for the first few years, we lived with my grandmother and my step-grandfather. So again, it was that community thing.
Right,
but
right. But your grandmother was quite a woman.
Yeah. Well, I think we all talk about that matriarchal grandmother, and in just about every, and I call the earth, I don't know why I call them it, but the earth people, the Italians, the Greeks, African Americans, people that really, I know. The mother. You don't even need to say anymore.
Despite the fact that it was a paternalistic society at the time, in general, they didn't run the house.
They didn't run the house. They didn't run anything. Because I always remember in every family I ever knew, the father was hood, and my word is blah blah blah, and the mother would go, yeah, and she'd go, Jimmy, you should just go. I'll talk to him later. That's who was running the house.
Right. But there was a lineage of, because we're getting into food here. There was a lineage of great cooks in the family, starting with your great aunt, right?
My great aunt May, who raised some of her brothers and sisters because their parents died early. Then she raised some of her brothers and sisters' children because some of them married, moved away, or had to go away to work and left the kids there with her. And then she raised their children's children, which would be my mother's generation. And this is a woman who never married, obviously, because she didn't have time.
She had plenty to do.
But I think in any kind of rural, and this was Arkadelphia, Arkansas. Is there an Arkadelphia, Arkansas? There is. Washita University is there, and blah, blah, blah.
These great names.
Oh, yeah. Arkadelphia.
Yeah.
Philadelphia is hard enough to access on a certain level. Arkadelphia. Anyway, I think, and her parents, one was a Cherokee native and one was a slave. So I think when you come already out of towards food, I'm getting, you're already dealing with people who cooked from the earth.
Right.
They cooked what they had. They weren't moving from the top, they were moving from the bottom. So people like that learned how to cook, and the things we now consider cuisine and
right.
They were culling this stuff out of the earth and making it delicious and amazing and wonderful. Right. So she taught, I go back to Aunt May again, she taught, my grandmother was a great cook, but she had her own kind of thing. She could cook things, but she was the kind of lady who, like, if she didn't want to cook something, she just didn't bother learning to cook it, It wasn't in her file cabinet, so to speak. But my Aunt Margaret, who was my grandmother's daughter, she took her cooking lineage from our Aunt May. So she cooked everything, cakes, pie, everything.
Now, was she around when you were living? You lived with your grandmother for a while, right?
Yeah. My Aunt Margaret was older than my mom. My mother's the baby. But everybody was there, There were times when we'd have Thanksgiving dinner, and there were, I don't want to say 4 generations in the house. Well, yeah.
How extraordinary.
It was extraordinary.
But go ahead.
No, but to grow up with that, know. And for us, it was normal. Even my brother, who's 8 years younger than me, barely, Aunt May was in her 90s when he was little. So he didn't know them alive and doing and going, but he at least got to know her, you know what I mean? But for us, my cousins and I, we would be there, and there were my grandmother's cousins, which was her generation, Aunt May, Uncle Willie, who were brother and sister, my mother's generation, and then us. So that's 4,
And what was the sort of daily cuisine like with her? With them? With grandma and with your grandmother?
It varied.
Grandma was known as QT?
That's her name.
What's the story behind that name?
You're damned if I know.
Really?
It's Q period, T period. That was her name. And I don't know the story. We've often tried to figure out why anyone. I think there was one other lady in the town who was named QT, we found out. And she used to always, because my grandma was quite cut. That's why I'm in show business, I think, because of getting it from her. She'd say, I was so damn cute, they named me QT. So, these are, again, all working people. Right. And my grandmother and my mother for a short time, but my grandmother did domestic work all her life. Yep. My Aunt May did, I would say it's domestic work, but she did laundry, literally. Now, we're talking not about putting it in your washer and your dryer. We're talking about the black kettle. Yep. Not even that.
Really?
Yeah,
no scrub
that
board?
came along.
Oh.
The black kettle in the backyard with the fire under it. the kettle is still in the family, you know. And anyway, she would do laundry for a living. That's the most important thing there. And sometimes my mother still talks about it. She said, how she did that, I will never, you know, to do that and use it with a stick. And I mean, it sounds so like, was that thousands of years ago?
Right.
But it wasn't, you know. And you had to light the fire, you had to pour the water out, you had to do rinse water, you had to do bluing. I don't know if you know what that is. With white clothes. Somebody does, right? Yeah, and all of that process, and then dry them on the line, and then iron them, fold them, package it, and then take it to people.
Yeah.
And that was her living. So
never mind what she did when she came home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when she came home, there was dinner, right? And my mother always talks about, she says, God, make a cook so, she said, it was such good food, but there just was never enough of it, you know, because they, you know, they didn't have a lot of money, but she could cook everything.
Right. What were the staples?
I think from what I'm told, you know, back there, it was just your regular vegetables. You know, she raised chicken, so there was chicken on Sunday usually. During the week, I don't know what would be a meat thing in the week, but chicken was usually reserved for Sunday dinner. Potatoes, you know, your usual, you know.
And what about when you were at QT's?
Yeah, her cooking daily was sort of, well, I think about it, you know, it was things like rice, a little more of the meat diet, you know, pork chops. Breakfast was the thing. That's what I remember from my grandmother the most, oddly. She cooked all the time. One thing about the soup, which we'll talk about, but breakfast for her, and I still make it for myself, was fried potatoes, eggs, bacon, you know, pretty rudimentary, but bacon, coffee. She used to give me coffee when I was like 8, you know. It was like this much coffee and that much milk. And she, you want a cup of coffee? And I go, yeah. You know, and she'd make me coffee. Funny, when I moved to New York, I was determined I was going to be able to have this breakfast, right? And I even bought an iron skillet, because she had this skillet, which my cousin has now, that has been passed down from Aunt May to her, and I had it, and I thought, give it to them. They're going to use it more than I will. Anyway, so I made these potatoes. I cut them up, I put them in Wesson, something, you know. And I thought, this is not it. This doesn't taste right, you know. And I called my grandmother up. I said, she was living at the time. I said, Mama T, you know, I'm trying to make your potatoes. It ain't happening. What's up? She said, well, what did you do? I said, well, I sliced them long ways, salted them, peppered them before, you know, mix them up. Blah, blah, blah. I said, and I put them in the skillet and I fried them. She said, what did you fry them in? I said, well, Wesson, whatever I had. She said, oh, no, baby, you can't fry them in no Wesson. She said, you got to have fat meat grease. You've got to have
bacon fat.
You've got to have bacon grease. Yeah. And as soon as I did that, there was the flavor, right? And the idea, of course, obviously the bacon flavors the potatoes. It's not just straight oil, you know, it's another thing. And she said, well, let me just tell you the rest of it so you know. She said, okay, you fry the potatoes in the bacon fat. You take the potatoes out, don't change the oil. Cook the eggs in that oil, because you've got potato ready, and you've gotten the oil presumably from bacon, so that already happened. So you've got the bacon thing, you've got bits of potato, and then you cook the eggs, salt, pepper, just salt and pepper. I'm a garlic powder person now myself, but just salt and pepper was her recipe. And then you have the right flavors in the process up to breakfast, you know?
Yeah, I don't know how many times I've had this conversation about fat being flavor, but certain kinds of fat particularly.
And it's flavored differently.
In my house, my mom had a can that she kept on the stove. Yeah, exactly. And as soon as the bacon was fried and the eggs were done and everything, the fat went into the can and you used it.
And you know what's very interesting to me? I can't think of anyone's house who knew the secret that you'd go to and they didn't have that can on the stove. No. You know, it wasn't until later, like my mother cooked with Wesson, you know. It was that sort of 50s, Jetson, 60s thing. But everybody else, the older people, they all had a can on the stove, and it could plop in this thing, and that was what it, you know. But it flavored the food.
Absolutely.
You know.
Yeah, yeah.
And I would love to go spend the summers with them, because my Aunt Margaret, because my grandmother cooked, but she didn't cook. You know, Aunt Margaret had the family. She had a husband, she had children, so she cooked every day. My grandmother cooked what you needed to eat. That was kind of how she dealt with it. But my Aunt Margaret was the real deal. They always had a cake in the pantry, you know, she'd make pies. I literally remember was telling somebody, and they said, where did you grow up, in Beaver, Cleveland? I said, yeah, kind of. That's how her house was. She would bake the pie, and the pie was sitting on the windowsill to the backyard, cooling, wafting through the house, if it hadn't already from the cooking. Balanced meals, she was very conscious of that, so that you have to have your vegetable, you have to have your this, you have to have that. And that's kind of how I really got introduced to eating and food the way I do now.
Right.
You know,
Balanced,
yeah. And also that idea of, you know, she'd make spaghetti, or she'd make this, or she'd make that. It was a varied, I don't think they ever ate anything the same, maybe bi-weekly,
right,
but not daily, you know. And she, like Aunt May, was delicious, but there was never a lot of it. You know, that was her, does that mean?
That's right.
That was her whole thing was, you know, and she was very diet conscious. She was like, we'd had, you know, in my mother's house, we didn't drink orange juice and stuff, like we didn't have it. But she had the thing, you know, the Minute Maid where you open it up and you make the thing. But she had the little juice glasses. And I loved orange juice. I always wanted some more. And she said, that's all you need. That's vitamin C, and that's why you're drinking it. You're not drinking it for taste.
That's right.
I bet I'm drinking it for taste. I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Sometime when she baked cakes, she baked great cakes. And fairly recent, maybe 5 years ago, when she was 91, I said, "Hey, Margaret, you don't want to bake a cake?" You know, she said, "I don't even remember how to bake a cake now." Well, she hadn't baked one in years.
Oh, right, yeah.
She just kind of reached a point where the kids were gone, and she thought, you know, my uncle passed back in '82, and she thought, well, what the hell am I baking a cake for? I'm not going to eat it, and there's nobody here.
Right.
So she just stopped, you know. And
Now,
I search always for the taste of her cakes, and I still haven't found it.
Was there, were you able to extract any kind of secrets from her, or was it too late?
Well, kind of. If I'd done it a few years ago, she might. I mean, well, I don't know if she has recipes written down. I think she just knew how to do it.
Right.
You know, the only recipe I did get from her, and this was like 25, almost 30 or more, maybe years ago, was she made oatmeal cookies. Mm-hmm. But she made them, one batch she would put chocolate chips in, and another batch she would put walnuts, and another batch she would put coconut. And then there was that special batch that had coconut, walnuts, and chocolate chips. Yeah, And they were so good, oh my God. And I said, "Hey, Margaret, what do you," and she said, it's just regular oatmeal, you know, back of the oatmeal box kind of thing. But what you put in them is what makes the difference, the coconut. Because a lot of people never thought about it. Can you put coconut in oatmeal cookies? I said, yeah, you do if you want these cookies. And the walnuts, you know, it's not your general, because most people think of an oatmeal cookie as the oatmeal cookie.
Right.
And now because of, you know, some of the different things, you've got chocolate chip oatmeal cookies. But when you start putting the pecans, and if you get the cookie that has all of it, you got yourself a cookie. Mm-hmm. I'm just saying.
And a meal.
Totally.
Almost a meal.
Oh, yeah.
You know, you got a little protein from the nuts. Right. You got some fat from the... You know.
And they were precious because, you know, again, she didn't make a lot of them, you know. Right. And you could get one or maybe two. And she was very funny. I mean, she was the most loving, wonderful woman, but she had this stern way, which came from Aunt May.
Yep.
And I'd say, "Aunt Margaret, can I have another cookie?" "No." "What do you want another cookie for?" I said, "Because they're delicious." She said, "They'll be delicious the next time you They'll be delicious when you get another one, which is not going to be now.
Now, you told me a story about a little adventure you had with a piece of cake.
Oh, God, yeah. I still have trauma about it. As I said, my aunt's cakes were really, really delicious. And she did 3 basics of chocolate fudge, just a plain old American chocolate cake, right? And she did coconut cake, you know, with the coconut. And she did one that was like a yellow cake with a slightly lemon cream frosting.
Oh
my God. It just even now I think about it, which this is the cake that was existing in this incident. And we'd had dinner and we'd all had a piece of cake, as you do, and maybe Jell-O or something like that. Well, he had to have another piece, right?
He's how old?
He's 9. Something like that.
Right.
So I thought I'll just sneak myself down to the kitchen and get myself another, just stand, they'll slice it down, you know, just a little, nothing that they'd notice, right? So I take it was one of those cake things, where you put it on and the things come out the side and you put it on, you carry. Well, I got the cake. I'd had the cake. And I was going to put the cake back in the pantry. But I didn't close the things on the side all the way, right? So I picked the cake up to take it to the pantry, and the whole cake fell out of the bottom. It would have been okay, maybe, had it just fallen to the floor. But for whatever reason, it flipped over.
Oh.
So the top of the cake was on the floor, and I thought, don't go upstairs, just go out and disappear.
Right.
Don't bother to go up, just disappear. That'd be better, right? So I thought, okay, I got to figure this out, right? So I said, and I was a clever little lad, so I took a knife, a spatula, and I kind of went under, then I took the other spatula, and I got the cake, I don't know how to this day, but I got it back over and on the thing. Well, of course, all the frosting from the top was on the floor. I thought, okay, problem number 3 by this point. How do you get the frosting back on the cake? So I took the spatula, I scraped it off the floor. And I scraped it, and I just on the top of the thing like that. I just go and get some more, like spackle, on the top. Smooth it out.
Smooth.
Well, by now, of course, there's crumbs in the frosting and all sorts of things.
Yeah, a little dirt, maybe.
A little dirt, a little, comet, maybe something. So I smoothed it out, and I put the thing back. And we're upstairs watching television. And my cousin says, I guess maybe we hadn't had cake. So my cousin says, I'm going to get some cake. And I thought, oh no, somebody's going to the cake, right? And maybe you count 10. And I hear, was it my aunt? I can't remember now. Anyway, somebody went downstairs to the pantry. And I hear, what the hell happened to this cake? And I thought, take me now, Lord. Just take me now. May I sink it to the floor, may I fall into the ocean. And I never, until about 3 years ago, told her what actually happened. She thought I just messed with it. You know what I mean? Like, I just liked the frosting, so I kept eating the frosting, and then I tried to fix it. Knowing my aunt, who was very, like you said, beaver cleaver, if she'd known that cake had hit the floor,
right,
and then I'd put it back on the plate, she would have had it. 3 years ago, I said, maybe 4, I said, hey, Margaret, I have a confession to make for you. And I told her what happened. And her first reaction was just as I thought. She said, on the floor? I said, on the floor. I said, and I put it back. She said, why didn't you just tell me? Because I had to bear that speech of, if you just want another piece of cake, all you have to do is ask for it. You don't have to go down. And then I'm thinking, okay, I'll take that because you don't know the worst part of the story. You're just thinking I got an extra piece, right? And we laugh about it often now. She's still living. She's 96. And I tell her, I said, I thought about that cake again. And I'll call in the middle of the day, I thought about that cake. And then she go, oh, God. It still gets her ire up. She's like, oh, God. The
still
floor.
Fries her grits.
It does. It does. It still does.
You also have talked about the chicken soup. Mm-hmm. Now, was this QT's chicken soup?
Yeah.
What were the ingredients?
Well, I am guessing for the most part, but she would do she would take chicken necks and wings, because again, that's what, and she could afford more by this point, but that's how you made the soup by this point, right? Chicken neck, chicken wings, boil them, big pot of water, an onion, cumin, and salt, pepper. And she would boil it until all the meat fell off of the chicken wing or the neck or whatever. So you had the bits, chicken wing. And she'd kind of take a little of the stuff out, but she'd leave most of it in. And then she would take a handful of, I guess you'd call them, they're very thin noodles, They're not rice noodles. That's not what I'm thinking. Anyway, you know what I mean. They're not wide noodles or egg noodles. They were egg, but thin. And she'd take like a good handful and just boom in the pot and boil it a little more till they cooked. And that was her chicken soup. But I'm going to tell you, not unlike matzo ball soup, not unlike, what's the Greek version? There's a Greek version.
Avrolemon is usually,
a little lemon in it,
yeah, right. Eggs and lemon.
Yeah. The soup, she used to call it was my good for what ails you soup. Mm-hmm. If you were lonely, it made you feel better. If you were hungry, it fed you. If you were sick, it made you well. And I don't know, I've since come to believe, obviously we all know there's something about a chicken. That new novel by, something about a chicken.
Right.
But I always like to think now it was the love that went into the pot, along with the noodles and the chicken and the salt and the pepper. Because it really did. You know, if you were just a little down or something, she had soup, she'd go, hey, eat a bowl of soup, you know. And by the time you got through eating the soup, you just felt better. I don't know, psychological or whatever.
Well, I also think there's some scientific evidence that indicates that there's some antiviral, maybe not bacterial, but antiviral in the soup.
Yeah.
I mean, in the what's rendered from the chicken.
Right, exactly. Well, there must be, right? I mean, many cultures have this version of chicken soup, you know, and it seems to do the same thing for whoever the people are that have it, you know.
Tell me about the holidays. What were holidays meals like?
Traditional. By that I mean, you know, we all now know that Thanksgiving, I'll use Thanksgiving, you know, the turkey, stuffing, blah, 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 blah. And in our house, generally it was, I'm trying to think of the menu now. My Aunt Margaret's was always a little, because she'd have Waldorf salad. It was always a little fancier, you know. But the basic thing was the turkey, cornbread stuffing, always cornbread. I've gone to people's houses with dinner and they have bread stuffing or more oyster. And I'm like, where's my cornbread stuffing? You know, I have to have my, cornbread stuffing. Sweet potatoes or candied yams, you know. And Margaret would sometimes do green beans. My grandmother did potato salad, cranberry sauce. Making you hungry yet? Cranberry sauce. Like I said, my Aunt Margaret would do Waldorf salad, which was a starter thing. My Aunt Liz, my oldest aunt, she had a carrot salad. No, that was Aunt Margaret too. A carrot salad with raisins. Yeah, kind of a sweet carrot salad with raisins and kind of a creamy, almost like a coleslaw dressing with it. And Aunt Liz did a dish that was cauliflower. It's like a whole cauliflower head, right? Steamed in a pot, and then she would put it in like a larger bowl, and she would pour, it was Thousand Island, wasn't Thousand Island, I forget the dressing, not ranch, something else, over the whole thing, and you put it in the refrigerator. So the dressing would, of course, seep down into the, the cauliflower, and then when it was cold, you'd take it out and you just sliced it. Just take, isn't that great? It's delicious. And I didn't never like cauliflower. I was like, what is that? You know, but her cauliflower, and no salt, no pepper, nothing like that. Just the cauliflower and the dressing.
Any other holiday specials?
No, because again, it was very specific, very traditional.
Sort of all-American?
Yeah, the all-American Thanksgiving meal. And if someone else cooked the meal, which was only my grandmother usually would cook it, unless my Aunt Margaret cooked it, my Aunt Margaret would always do the desserts because she could bake the cake, you know, and she would bring the cake. And I mean, it was just like you thought a baby was born. I mean, people would carry on it, and she'd take the cake out and sit it on the table, and everybody would go, oh, look, oh, it's beautiful, look at that cake, you know. And they'd go through this whole thing, and people would just stand there and look at it. And you think, so I think a lot of times people ate the meal just so they could get to the cake.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
We all do that.
Right. And Jell-O, plain old Jell-O with fruit cocktail. Right? Yeah, see, everybody, that's an American thing. Fruit cocktail, usually for holidays, her coconut cake. The other cakes were kind of like every day, if you can imagine. The coconut cake was the fancy cake, right? And she would make that, and we'd have fruit cocktail, and that was the dessert. Traditional for our family.
Now, you were raised as a Roman Catholic, right?
I went to Catholic, raised as a Roman Catholic, 14 years.
So Fridays were?
Friday was no meat until, Vatican II, which was, I guess, like 63, something like that. And it was a slow turn, because when you're in a Catholic school, I mean, you always knew it was Friday because you could smell the fish from 5 blocks away, cooking in the cafeteria. You weren't getting anything else. It was fish sticks, maybe spaghetti, it was sort of a downed version of what you were going to eat at home later that day. But so it was always fish sticks or something like that. But this Mrs. Wilburn, who was the head of our cafeteria, lovely, lovely lady, she made something that I struggle now to try to replicate, and I still haven't mastered it yet, called tuna burgers. It was like a hamburger bun, tuna with cream cheese. But they were wrapped in wax paper, and they were, from the oven. And I'm telling you, it was so good. I don't even know,
I've
tuna burgers.
Never heard of this.
I know.
I mean, I've heard of tuna burgers being sort of ground up tuna with some breadcrumbs and some onion and some other things.
This was tuna.
Cream cheese.
And cream cheese on a hamburger bun. But what made it wonderful, of course, was that it was heated. It wasn't a cold sandwich, So, of course, the cream cheese would melt and melted into the tuna.
Sort of a tuna melt, kind of.
It was a tuna melt of a sort.
Yeah.
I think the burger thing was what made it a tuna burger, the hamburger bun. But if we didn't smell fish frying in the cafeteria on Friday, we figured we're having Mrs. Wilburn's tuna burgers because you didn't smell any fish, right? Happiness ensued because everyone loved them. The nuns, they'd all go, "Oh, these are just Mrs. Wilburn. We love." They'd always tell her everyone, "We love your tuna burgers," and she'd go, "Uh huh." That was her answer. Uh huh.
Now there was also a tradition in your family, 4th of July, yes?
Yeah. Well, aside from barbecue, which is again pretty American standard, I had a cousin who was my grandmother's. They were like sisters, even though they were cousins. Eddie Mae, Eddie named after Aunt May, who was her aunt. Okay.
So confusing.
I know. But
anyway.
My aunt is Lizzie May because she's named after her grandmother, Lizzie Page, and my Aunt May, who was like the other grandmother. So May kind of passed down through
the
a lot
generations,
of names. Yeah, because she was the big cheese, right?
Right.
So Eddie Mae, who had the recipe for ice cream, she was the only one, I don't know where she got it, but she was the only one who had it. And we're talking I don't know if any of you, I'm too young to know about it, but I saw it. The original green ice cream makers. They were made out of wood, right? And they had the cylinder that went in the middle and you cranked it on the side and you had to put ice and salt and the whole business. There was a little spout that let the water roll out and you had to keep putting it in, right? And it made like a handful by the time it got finished.
Right. Is it worth
Excuse me. But she had the recipe. So on 4th of July, or some, summer holiday, usually it was around the 4th of July, we would barbecue. There would be barbecue. Somebody would bring potato salad or, whoever. It was always sort of a combination. My grandmother sometimes would do the whole meal. And then my cousin would come over early with her ice cream thing. What made it so wonderful was that everybody, because and it got harder as the ice cream became more solid, everybody had to take a turn at spinning the cylinder. So it was really one of those things where everybody kind of had to work for it, and she called it her custard because the way she made the recipe, this is, at least I don't know how to make it, but I knew it was eggs, vanilla, nothing special, pet milk, whole pet milk, cans and cans.
Condensed milk?
Yeah. Well, condensed is sometimes different. Like Borden's condensed is a very sweet.
Or carnation,
thick.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, carnation.
Yeah.
Pet milk is a little, little more stock, if you will, like chicken stock.
Mm-hmm.
And she would take all that together, boom, 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 boom. And the eggs was the big deal because it was always like, where's the eggs going to go? She'd whip up the eggs. I think she separated the white from the yolk. The yolk was the thing. Whip it up. And it went into a pot and got cooked and cooked and cooked and cooked. And of course, sugar, And it wasn't complicated. It was just unbelievably delicious.
Labor intensive.
Yeah, it was labor intensive. And she usually already had that cooked before anybody arrived, the thing. And then that went into the cylinder, little by little, and you'd make one thing, and then you had to take the blades out. There were the wooden spallet things that were in there. And you'd get a few bowls out, and then she'd do the second one, and it was just an all-day thing, But I always remember because the kids got to turn the thing at the beginning because it was easy, They'd say, okay, you all go out there and turn it. And we'd go, yeah, it's my turn, it's my turn. And it was just, we're spinning it around in a circle. And when it got a little harder, you were less excited about doing it.
The enthusiasm waned.
The enthusiasm waned. And the next age group would take over, And by the time it was really, and that's how you knew it was ready. The harder it got to turn, you knew the ice cream had formed and so forth.
And it's another example of how the family coalesced around an event.
Food.
Be it a holiday or this.
And I never quite thought of it in that way until you and I were originally speaking about it because I didn't think about how, I always thought it was the holiday that made the gathering. Yeah. And it was. But the 4th of July. But the celebration of the gathering was the sharing of the food.
Mm-hmm.
and the meal,
right.
you know.
Right.
And now when I thought about it, I just remembered I could hear in my head all of the commentaries. You know, we would sit around the table, Thanksgiving, and it was an ongoing, especially for Aunt Margaret, it was because we sat down. It was a whole, you know, table thing, I mean, it was really lovely. And you would just hear people, you know, hear the clicking. Oh, Margaret, this turkey is just perfect. Oh, Margaret, this Waldorf salad is just, you outdid yourself this year, blah, blah, blah. And that was the conversation, you know? It was about the food.
That's what it was like in my house. I mean, you know, I know families, obviously, we both do, who have political conversations. Or who talk about the events of the day or whatever. But when we sat down at the table, we talked about what was on the table.
What's on the table.
Yeah.
And I remember if anybody brought up something, actually, that was not, as they called it, for table discussion. That's how they put it. That is not for table discussion. And somebody, usually one of the elders, somebody would say something like, well, you know, Cousin Susie went out and stayed out. That's what you'd get. And everybody would, whoop. This is wonderful salad, you know.
And that's the way it went.
And that's the way it went. And the elders taught you. That was the thing, that whole table manner thing.
It was passed down. Yeah.
And it was like, that is not table conversation.
Now, when you mentioned this in passing, and I'd like to get into it a little bit more. You talk about having these gatherings of your own when you grew up. And in a way to recreate that feeling when you were a child.
Well, you know, you're away from home. I was living in New York City. And when it came, you know, I couldn't go home because, knock on glass, I was in Broadway shows. And you worked 2 shows on a holiday. You didn't get to go home. But I was determined to keep the tradition of what I grew up with, right? Excuse me. So I would cook. You know, and I thought, well, I'll just recreate the meals that I grew up with. And what it became was, because most of my friends from far-reaching, black, white, everybody had a tradition, you know, family, whatever, usually. But a lot of them didn't know how to cook, you know. They would say, well, I'll make it. I was going, no, that's okay.
Right.
I'll make it. You don't have to make it, you know. And I would make the food, and I was working, so I could afford it, and I'd invite everybody, you know, some of us were working, some of us were not working, and we'd have sometime the meal on the day before, the day after, because we were working. But at any rate, I would just cook the meal, which I loved doing, because I'd start the day before, 2 days before. I learned that. Some things you did in prep, right? Boil the potatoes day before, 2 days before, leave them in the refrigerator. You know, if you're going to make mashed potatoes.
Yeah, right.
Leave them in the refrigerator. All kinds of bits and pieces on into the meal. The turkey, don't forget to leave it out so it defrosts so that you have, you know. But all of this stuff I knew from just observing how it was done, right? Nobody taught me. I just watched and knew. And it's funny, even among my peer generation in my family, I don't think any of them know it. I learned it. You know, it's funny. That nobody else bothered to really. Anyway, I'm glad I did, because most of the reason why I wanted it is because I wanted to eat it. You know, I wanted to have, like I said, my cornbread stuffing, and I knew if I didn't cook it, I wasn't going to get any. So I just made it, you know. And if I could have it, then why not share it, right?
And you've talked about a woman, Sephra Herman? Sephra, excuse me.
Sephra, from the Bible, Sephra.
Tell me about Sephra.
Jethro's wife, I think. Sephra, a very dear friend, her father owned one of the largest music copying companies, or establishments, I should say, in New York City. Sephra was Jewish American. Her mother died when she was young. Her father married an African American woman. Sephra, who at the time, and I say this because it's part of it, this is not a commentary, was like about 300 and some pounds, right? Big woman, wonderful woman. One of those people you want to hug all the time. And she has this great laugh. She's still living. She's now like this big. But she had this great laugh. She would say things like, Ken, could you eat some steak tonight? And I'd go, yeah. And she'd go, yeah. She had this, it was kind of dirty too, but it was a great laugh. So this one particular time, because she didn't, for whatever, because I think it was a part, I don't know why, there was no kitchen where she was. So one day she says, you know what, Ken? I feel like cooking. I said, okay, so cook, She said, I don't have a kitchen. You have that big kitchen. I was living up on Central Park West and had a great kitchen. She said, you have that great kitchen. You think I could come over and cook in your kitchen? I thought, yes, you may come to my house and cook in my kitchen. I didn't know yet. I just said she wants to cook. Let her cook, right? She arrived at my door with her good friend, who was one of my best friends, Ann Haley, whose father wrote Roots, just name dropping. Wonderful, wonderful friend. They arrived at the door with 6 bags of groceries. I opened the door. I said, what's happening? She goes, I bought a few things. You mind? No, see that? So she comes in with the food. She starts cooking. She's got collard greens. She's got chicken to fry. She's got potatoes to make potato salad. The feast grew, right? And she's cooking all this stuff, and she's wheeling stuff and chopping up stuff. I said, you're going to make collard greens? She says, yeah, you mind? I said, no, I don't mind. She taught me something I use to this day, to put beer, just regular beer, in your collard greens because it tenderizes the greens. My grandmother didn't even do that. Mm-hmm. So I said to her, middle cooking, I said, Sephra, this is how I found out because I didn't know her stepmother was African American. I said, Sephra, how do you know how to cook all this stuff? She says, oh, my stepmother, blah, blah, blah. She says, she taught me how to cook. She said, my dad was kind of a cook. He cooked all the Jewish food when we'd have it. And my stepmother would cook and we'd have all the black food. She said, do you think we ate? I said, between the two, yes, I do. Yeah. And so by the time she finished, she had cooked, and she really did. She just wanted to cook. She needed the thing to cook. She had fried chicken. She had ham, collard greens, potato salad. I mean, she cooked all of this stuff because she hadn't been able to cook it in a long time, and she missed cooking it. Well, there's 3 of us, right? And she said, do you mind if I invite a couple other people? So she said, yeah, and these are friends because she's in the music business, right? She says, do you think I could invite Luther Vandross to come over? Luther loves a good meal. She said, I said, yeah, sure. And now I'm getting nervous. She goes, and maybe Nick Ashford and Valerie Simpson, who are wonderful,
Who lived in Westport, by the way. Who
yes, that's right. She did say. So they came over. And I'm starstruck. I won't even lie. I'm like, oh my God, these people are in my house. I can't believe it. Yeah. Now, they're good friends of hers, and they were lovely, but I'm still starstruck, right? And they came in, and Valerie said to Sephra, she looked in the pot, she says, oh my God, look at this food. She said, Sephra, did you put your foot in these pots? And she says, don't I always? And we ate we all had brain damage from eating. It was so good, and my God. And later, I just spoke with her like maybe a month ago. I said, Sephra, do you still cook? She goes, well, I do. She said, but I don't cook like I used to because I don't eat like I used to, right? She says, but every now and again, I do just what I did at your house. She says, sometimes I give it away. She said, but I have to cook. I have to go and make all my stuff. She said it's the therapy of cooking.
Right, right. And it's not just about the food.
Not just about the food. It's about what the food does and what it does to you to cook it, what it does to the people who receive it,
And it's about passing on of this.
Absolutely.
This thing.
Absolutely.
And also, I have to pump you for one more expression that you gave me the other day. Was it your grandmother or your aunt used to say?
No, they didn't say it. Other people, friends of mine in New York, when we were first coming, in the 70s and that. And please don't anyone be offended by this, because I think the root of it comes from, again, the Jewish culture, the Italian culture, the black culture, and I'm sure many others that I'm not aware of. When the mother cooked, the mother, right? You know where I'm going. When she cooked at the stove, you'll see it in some movies. You see the mother cooking, and of course, everything's moving. If she's a larger woman, if she's a smaller woman, everything's moving. And these friends of mine used to say, when somebody was really going to cook or had cooked well, that they swung their titties over the stove, And my friend, God rest her, Camille Saviola, Sicilian, she would always say, hey, Paige. That's what she was, hey, Paige. She goes, I think I'm going to swing my titties over the stove today. Another version of Sephra, right? Same woman, Italian, though. She said, I'm going to swing my titties over the stove. I'm going to make gravy, which, of course, is for real Italians, is what we call sauce,
tomato
right?
sauce, yes.
And she said she called it gravy. She goes, I'm going to make gravy. We'll make some pasta or something. We'll do something with it. But I'm going to make gravy. She goes, yeah, I'm going to swing my titties over the stove today. Come over. And that was just a statement we all used in the early 70s. And you'd eat the food and you go, you swung your titties over this, didn't you? You know, you say, oh, you stuck your foot in the pot, or you put your arm in it, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Now, change a little bit the subject, just because I would be remiss if I didn't talk a little bit about your entry into show business. How did this happen? Where did it come from? I mean, considering this background, your family.
Well,
nobody in show business.
Nobody in show business, although a couple could have been, probably should have been. As I said, my mother dated Ike Turner, so that was a showbiz realm was around. And my grandmother was as she said to me when she first came to visit me in New York to see me in a show, she took to all the people because they were kind of her kind of people. She was that kind of person anyway, right? And she said to me, she says, you know what? If I was a little bit younger, I'd move here. This is my kind of place, right? And the show people, the good part of it was that they were very open, very embracing, funny, usually.
Non-judgmental.
Non-judgmental, and she was the same way by her nature, right? So she really gelled at the show the other night at 54 Below. There was a lady there named Sheila Merriweather. When my grandmother was visiting on one visit, I went to do the show, and that same Ann Haley I spoke of, through whom I met Sheila Merriweather, they stayed at the house with my grandmother. And she entertained them. She got out a little scotch and a little this and that. And I came home that night and they were all 4 sheets in the wind. But they were like, Sheila said to me then, she says, your grandmother is extraordinary. I said, she is? I said, yeah, she's great. She goes, no, you don't understand. Your grandmother, she put it, she says, she schooled me tonight. She told me about life, my life, what I need to do, blah, blah, blah. Ever since then, whenever I see Sheila Merriweather, she always reminds me about the contribution my grandmother made to her. And she would always send hellos. My grandmother's been gone a while now. But anyway, she was in the audience the other night. And I was saying, after I did one number, I said, as my grandmother, Q.T. Page, used to say, there may be snow on the mountain, but there's still fire in the valley. And she said, Mama T. I said, yes. I said, who is that? I said, is that you, Sheila Merriweather? She said, yes. And she said to the audience, now this is the kind of night it was, right? She said, his grandmother taught me how to live. And everybody went, oh, that's wonderful, But she did in one whatever. So that's the kind of person she was. And that was very akin to what I think in the end led me into the business, that kind of acceptance and openness and blah, blah, blah.
Right.
I also started singing probably like in the 4th grade. They would take a station wagon. It's so beautiful when I think back on it. About 6 of us would go over to this. We were in an all-black Catholic parish, and we would go over to this other parish, which was an all-white parish. And we had the same order of nuns. And we would go over there on Friday afternoons, and we would sing in this chorus, which was called the Marian Choristers. So we would go over and we'd sing with them, and then when it came around for Christmas or Easter, we'd do concerts, and we'd all go over and participate in it. And when I was in the 7th grade, I want to say, they brought, her name was Sister Ruth Cecilia, and St. Cecilia is the patron saint of music. So they brought her to our school. Now, in our school, we didn't have speech or music or anything. It was a good school, but we didn't have arts, not really.
It was that time, too.
Yeah, sports. There was a lot of sports, but not a lot of arts. But Ruth Cecilia came to our school and said, oh, no, we've got to have, She established a speech program, and there was an intramural thing called the Bellarmine Speech League where you went and competed with all the other schools. We weren't part of it because we didn't, my cousin was from their parish. She established speech tournament. Speech classes. She went around to musicians and said, what are you doing on Wednesday? What are you doing on Tuesday? She got them to come and teach us instruments. She begged up instruments from God only knows where. So all of a sudden, our school had a music program and a drama program and concerts at the end, like we did at the other place. We'd do concerts, and the first play we did that she put on a musical was You'll Never Guess. And remember, all-black Catholic school. The first show she did was Snow White. She was a rebel, let's just say, right? And through her, I started to study music. And I should say that my cousin, who was, again, like I said, 3 years older than me, tap lessons, piano lessons, sang in the cathedral boys choir. So everything I did later, he had done, but I didn't have the training. He had it in school. And she came and she brought all of that to us, and she remained a friend. I think she maybe has passed away now. Kind of lost touch with her in the last year. But we stayed very, very good friends after, school time and so forth. This is a little off subject, but this same woman, when we came time to graduate grade school and go to high school, at the time there was a diocesan thing in the Catholic system where you went to the school in your diocese. And whatever that school had is what you got, Well, the school that was in our district didn't have music or theater or anything like our grade school. And she fought for us to get to go, myself and my best friend, to get to go to a school.
To a different school.
Yeah, that had music and drama, because we'd been trained by this point. And it was a big do, I won't go into all that, but she actually literally went to the Catholic board and said, how can you expect these kids to do better if you keep them, parentheses, and let them go somewhere where they can get the training they need to do what they do, right? And I guess she was forceful enough that they allowed my friend and I to go to a school called Bishop DeBerg. And we went there, and I was in school musicals, and I studied drama, and on and on and on, and here I sit today. But it's all because of this one nun.
And there's something about, especially when you're young and you're singing with other people, that's such an extraordinary kind of visceral experience. And it's holy.
It is. It really is.
Because you are joining together with other people, not just in something that's cooperative, but in something that is beyond reason.
Yeah. And it's also in the realm of art, and you're operating at a higher level.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they recommend a lot of time music programs to people who have developmental problems, social problems, because it takes you to another place.
My wife's, a relative of my wife, she had a very difficult stroke, and she couldn't communicate with speech, but she could sing.
That interesting.
Different part of the brain, but also
that
kind of memory that exists.
Sure, and expressing something that you maybe can't say, but you can sing.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah, exactly. It's interesting to me, too, that this adult tradition of gathering friends for food, which recreated the time when you were younger, and you end up electing a family rather than having the family that you were born with. But it's the ties are just as strong.
Oh, they are. Well, maybe even stronger in some cases. And also, when you think about New York City, as you may know it, and even in a fantasy version of it, people come there from all over. And when you come there for theater, you're not in your hometown. Very few people I ever met in New York were from New York. So you get these people who come from all these different, and when you form your family, your selected family there, the bonds are so strong because you don't have the rest of your family around you. So when the regular life stuff happens still, but you have these people who are there to support you. It's amazing, and it's one of those things, I think it happens in lots of different things, not just theater. But in the theater in particular, in my experience, these people become your family. Yeah. And there are people, like I mentioned, Camille Saviola and all the people, these are people that walk your path of life with you for years, whereas your family is back in East Schenectady. They don't know what your life is, they don't know what you're doing, but these people are with you every day. They're with you on the holidays when you don't get to go be with your family. And you become a family. And it's so wonderful when you reach my age to look back over 40-some years and realize these people, the few who have made it all the way down the path with you, and you get to reminisce and recollect about, oh, remember that time we all went to blah, 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 blah. Or remember that Thanksgiving when you broke my dining room chair? I said to a friend of mine, she's a rather large lady, and she sat in the chair, and the chair just went, and we all laughed, and she felt a little bad, but I said, it's just a chair. I mean, it's not like I can get another one, I hope. And it's just a chair, and we all laugh. And so then after that, every time she comes, she says, where's the wrought iron? You got any wrought iron? But that was the love for the family. You didn't, it was not like, oh my God. It was just called whatever was anybody needed, a lot of different things. People had children, people got married, people got divorced, and these are your friends, quote unquote, who are your family. This is not your birth family you're talking about necessarily, because you don't spend the bulk of your life with them. You spend it with these people.
So families come in different shapes and sizes. They come in different varieties, not necessarily blood.
No.
And it's interesting because I have a quote that I found that I scribbled down one day as I was reading through some material, and I'm plagiarizing it. I don't even remember who wrote it, but the quote is, "Food and family are the connection to who we are, where we come from, and the people who help shape us."
Yes.
And that can happen from
anywhere,
your childhood through your adulthood.
Absolutely.
And your formative years into your old age.
You hope so.
Well, here we are.
Here we are. Indeed.
I want you to also mention the cookbooks that you have become very, very fond of and that gave you a connection.
There are two cookbooks. And the reason I love them is because they incorporate all these things we just talked about. And one is called the Black National Family Cookbook. And what it is...
African-American Family Cookbook?
I'm sorry?
African-American Family
African-American, thank you. African-American Family Cookbook. And what it is basically a combination of all the recipes, generally kind of by holiday, but it doesn't just do holidays, you know. All the gathered recipes of all the traditional cultural meals and things. And it's interesting because when you go down south, there are things that are not part of the northern culture of things, like the difference between rice and grits. You know, some people, southerners, will eat a lot of grits. I never grew up with grits. We didn't eat it. You know, Arkansas was north of the grits line, I call it, you know. Things like that. But this book has everything in it and it's just recipes, you know, but you can find anything in this book. If you want to know and you want to get the book, it's really great. And then, like I said, it'll have the 4th of July meal, and it'll have all the traditional things with some variations, you know, but it'll have all the things that are a traditional African-American 4th of July meal. Thanksgiving, Easter, blah, 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 on and on and on. So that's one book. And the other book that I think I love more is called Spoon Bread and Strawberry Wine. And it's by an ex-model, Norma Jean Darden, and her sister. They wrote it together. They actually even did a show in New York. I didn't tell you this.
I didn't know that.
They did a show in New York called Spoon Bread and Strawberry Wine. And they also had 2 restaurants, I don't know if they're both still operative now, called Spoon Bread and Strawberry Wine. That's how popular it was. But in their book, what they did was they gave a history of their family through the recipes. And they would have Aunt Minnie's, I mean, they even have things in there like face cream. You know, Aunt Minnie's peach face cream. It's cooking, you know, and they'd have it in there. And they would tell you little bits of family history. And they had a very interesting family. They were very learned, a lot of college professors and lawyers and things like that. But it always came back to the food. And they would talk, you know, where it came from, and this is Uncle Joe's favorite something pie. And then they would talk about Uncle Joe, who went to Tuskegee, blah, 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 da, 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 da. And when he'd come to visit North, he would come, and my Aunt so-and-so, who was his sister, would always make Uncle Joe's favorite da, da, da. And that they give you this wonderful history along with all the food, which makes the food even more special, because you know where it comes from or what it represents.
Food and memory.
For them.
Food and memory.
Food and memory, absolutely. So those are 2 books. The African American Family Reunion, I think I didn't say. African American Family Reunion Cookbook. And the other one is Spoon Bread and Strawberry Wine. It might be a little harder to find that because it's been a few years now, but it's great. If you can find it, I treasure mine. I still go to it. You know, you start to forget around this time. You start to forget, like, did I put the so-and-so? Let me go to Spoon Bread and Strawberry Wine. And I'll go back and read all the things that go into the turkey dressing. And I went, that's it. I forgot to touch it, you know. But you can rely on it without a doubt, you know.
Favorite childhood memory of food? Yours?
There's so many, some of which I've mentioned. But I think when I close my eyes, what I see is myself at about 9 or maybe 8 or 9, maybe even younger. Because, you know, there was always the kids' table, you know, when my cousins and I were at the card table in the corner and the rest of the family was at the big table. And I remember when I got old enough to sit at the big table. And like I said, my aunt, it was a lace tablecloth. It was beautiful. It was really appointed beautifully, And you'd sit there and it was like magic. And I think part of the magic was the food, but it was also you looked around the table, and like I said, at one point there were 4 generations sitting around the table. And each generation had their turn, you know what I mean? On whatever level they were at and doing this thing, this gathering of family around the table. And here it was at my aunt's time, and she was the one providing that for everybody, And I think that's what I think about the most, because the house was full of love and full of family, and it was the occasion of a holiday, but it was because we were going to sit down and eat this meal.
Yeah.
And we would always eat around 3. I don't know why that just came to me. Not at earlier. Some people, we're going to eat at 6. 6, 3 o'clock. That meant you had time to go to church, and get there.
And also, the kids could get to sleep at a decent hour.
Absolutely. And you could party a little. You eat for 3 to 4, maybe 4:30, and then you could hang around and be out of there by 6.
Yeah, right.
And and everybody you'd start hearing the older people go, well, that's all you'd hear, right? And you knew it was time to start gathering your things. Well, you go, oh yeah, that's right. Let's get going. We got to get out of here, And it was so beautiful. That's my favorite memory.
Ken Page, thank you, my friend.
My pleasure.
This has been a wonderful experience, just sitting, talking to you, and learning so much about another life, another culture, another
I'm so glad
memory.
you're doing this. It's great.
So am I.
It's great. Food is the thing. Come on. It is. We know that.
Thank you, buddy.
My
Thank
pleasure.
you, everybody. Ken Page. Ken Page.